The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will soon announce whether it will keep grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone and Northern Continental Divide ecosystems on the endangered species list as threatened species. For years, it's been a hotly debated decision. As Joe Lassar reports, some Montanans say delisting is long overdue, while others worry that state governments can't properly manage the bears.
Are you ready to go take the sheep out? Let's go, Finn.
Lisa Schmidt runs sheep and cattle on her ranch just outside of Conrad.
Yeah, you need a treat, don't you?
Schmidt calls this God's country. These rolling hills between the Rocky Mountain front and the expanse of the prairies are also grizzly bear country. But grizzlies were rarely seen here when Schmidt and her late husband bought this place back in 2006.
You didn't think about bears. Now we live with them. Like, we know that they're out there. There's a sow that has been raising cubs at the west end of the ranch.
As grizzly populations in the mountains have grown, the bears have spread east and are now a fairly regular sight. Living somewhere wild enough to support them is something that Schmidt values.
Living in a place that has grizzly bears and wolves and all these predators, they're all pretty cool. And we live in a place that has all that and most people don't. Go slow, Finn.
However, her relationship with the bears got off to a rocky start.
I woke up one morning and went down to the barn and there were dead sheep everywhere. So that was the first time that I experienced a grizzly bear.
That incident began an adjustment period that played out over a number of years.
At first, you're scared to death, and then you get mad because you can't do anything about it. I got really mad when a grizzly bear was in our yard and all of a sudden my daughter doesn't want to go outside anymore. And you can't blame her. You know, the kid was 6 or 7 or 8, and here's this massive beast.
Schmidt now feels acceptance and even admiration towards grizzlies as they reclaim their original habitat.
But the caveat is, I need the tools to protect my livestock.
Soon, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will decide how easy it will be for ranchers like Schmidt to use lethal tools. Right now, states need federal approval to move or remove problem bears. But both Montana and Wyoming have petitioned to remove some grizzly bears from the federal list of threatened species and return management of the bears back to states and tribes. In February, the Fish and Wildlife Service will finish year-long status reviews of the Northern Continental Divide and Greater Yellowstone grizzly bear populations and decide if more than 90% of all grizzlies in the lower 48 will be delisted. They've been delisted and then relisted twice before, following legal challenges. Montana is arguing that now is the time.
Everything that Montana has done, everything that Montana is doing, the resources that are being applied, you can't say we're not doing a good job managing grizzly bears.
Decades of work between states, tribes, and federal agencies has led to one of the keystone accomplishments of the Endangered Species Act. The lower 48 was home to an estimated 50,000 grizzly bears before westward expansion by American and European settlers. By the time they became protected in 1975, 600 to 700 bears remained, and unchecked killing and habitat loss shrunk their historic range by 98%. Since then, their numbers have roughly tripled, and the two populations that are up for delisting have both surpassed federal recovery numbers. Their range has steadily expanded as well. And last year, a bear was documented in the upper Missouri River breaks for the first time in a century, and in the Pryor Mountains, directly south of Billings, for the first time since the 1890s. These sightings don't mean that there are breeding populations in these areas, but bear biologist Frank Van Manen says they indicate robust populations in the heart of grizzly country.
In the core of the habitat, densities are high because all the good habitats are now occupied. The fact that we're seeing these density-dependent effects in the population, you only see those in populations that are close to reaching the carrying capacity of the ecosystem.
Van Manen says there's good genetic health in the greater Yellowstone population, despite it being long isolated from populations up north.
Genetic diversity is not declining, and the population is large enough where we don't anticipate that to decline in the coming decades. The habitat securities that led to robust growth during the 1990s are still in place and should be able to sustain this population into the long-term future. From a biological perspective, yes, this is the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem is a recovered population. And the recovery trajectories have been so similar, one could make a similar argument about the Northern Continental Divide as well.
But delisting requires more than biological recovery. According to von Manen, 85% of grizzly bear deaths are caused by human activity. So Montana has to prove that adequate safeguards are in place to ensure that after delisting, the number of those deaths will continue to be monitored and minimized.
We have people and resources in place to continue to address grizzly bear conflicts, ideally to prevent those conflicts.
Under federal management, there are limits on human-caused deaths. Montana says those limits will remain if delisting takes place.
There's a maximum number of bears that could die in a year based on the size of the population, and it doesn't really matter what the cause is. And so we're committed to not exceeding those limits.
But some are arguing that laws from 2021, easing regulations on hunting wolves and black bears, will inadvertently kill grizzlies too, making it impossible for the state to get a clear picture on how many grizzlies are dying and why.
The management of grizzly bears is not something that we can trust to the state agencies with the politicians doing what they're doing.
Chris Servine led the federal grizzly bear recovery program for 35 years. He wrote the original 1982 grizzly bear recovery plan and also wrote the delisting plan the first time the Greater Yellowstone grizzlies were delisted in 2007.
At that point, I was confident that the bears would be carefully managed upon delisting. But what's happened in the recent years is that we now have political influence on the management of animals like bears and wolves.
Servine says his view on delisting did a 180 after the 2021 legislature allowed the use of neck snares, bait, and night vision scopes to hunt wolves. Black bear hunting with dogs, which had been outlawed since 1921, was also legalized. According to Servine, these practices increase the chance that grizzly bears will be killed too.
The idea that you can put these highly risky activities into grizzly bear habitat and manage the mortality of grizzly bears and know about all the dead bears that are going to occur that's not going to happen. A lot of these things will happen and we will never know about it. The bears may get caught by a neck snare and pull the snare away and die.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also expressed concern over these hunting laws in a letter to FWP last year. The letter detailed how another law, allowing Montanans to kill grizzlies for simply threatening livestock, conflicts with the Endangered Species Act and would need to be changed before delisting. The law outraged environmentalists, who said the term threatening was too vague. The 2023 legislature heeded the Fish and Wildlife Service's warning, passing a new law that says private landowners can kill a bear only when it is in the act of attacking livestock. FWP officials, not private landowners, can determine if a bear's behavior constitutes as threatening, and then grant approval to kill that bear if they deem it is. The law clarified that these rules would only take effect after delisting, and that bears killed in this way would count towards the outlined mortality limits.
If we start pushing up against those mortality limits, we would get more conservative.
Governor Greg Gianforte's press secretary called these new rules science-based and said the governor has full confidence that current Montana law, in conjunction with the rules enforced by FWP, make the state well prepared to manage this iconic American species. Delisting would allow for grizzlies to be hunted. Under Montana's proposed plan, hunting won't be considered until 5 years after delisting. McDonald calls it a surgical tool that FWP could use to manage the population. Servine says that from a management perspective, hunting is not necessary.
I'm not opposed to hunting, but there's no biological need to hunt grizzly bears. Grizzly bears can be managed very well without ever hunting them.
Montana says that the population monitoring, public education, and habitat protection that got grizzlies to where they are now will continue. But with those carnivore hunting laws still in place, Servine is skeptical of Montana's ability to manage.
The bears are not ready to be delisted because of the inadequacy of regulatory mechanisms.
Regardless of how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decides, life goes on for Schmidt in grizzly bear country. Securing attractants and electric fencing go a long way in preventing conflicts. The 3 Great Pyrenees Akbash guard dogs she got several years ago add extra security.
So the dogs stay with the sheep all the time. They look for coyotes, they look for bears, they're just alert.
Most bears Schmidt sees are skittish around people and often indifferent to livestock.
I've had bears walk through the cows when the cows are out grazing, and they don't care. It's no big deal.
But in the rare chance that an attack happens, and she's there to see it, Schmidt would welcome the option to take care of the situation herself. For her, lethal action would be a last resort.
The time that I would use a gun is if I didn't have any other options. And so the options that run through my mind are hazing, somehow, whether that's with a truck or a pot and pan or yelling at them. If I can get them to leave, that's great. But if they're not going to leave, then that's when I shoot them.
Schmidt acknowledges the part ranchers played in the bloody history of grizzly bears and other carnivores in the U.S. But she believes the conflict between ranchers and carnivores is more complex than that generalization.
And I don't want to be thrown into that group, that stereotype, just because I raise livestock. When you talk about bears, most people think that, like, to a rancher, it's all financial. It's all about the money. And that's not it. When I walk out the door every day, I know that the animals that are out there depend on me, and they depend on me completely. It's the moral responsibility that I have chosen to accept.
The pending federal decision could mark an important chapter in the complex history of this great species, and play a role in the way people like Schmidt live and work around them. For Impact, I'm Joe Lasar.
If the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service rules in favor of delisting, it would be a year until that would take effect. Management of grizzly bears within Glacier and Yellowstone National Parks would not change if delisting occurs.